In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And with that single sentence, the stage is set for the most compelling story ever told. From the creation of the world, to the fall, to the flood, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and to Joseph, these ancient stories carry profound truths that can shape our lives today. What are they saying? How are they prompting us to see our world? And what are they offering to us to help encounter the character of God? This is Genesis, the beginning of beginnings. We'll experience the story that started it all.
Well, good morning. Good to have you with us on this Back to Church Sunday. My name is Don Pedde. If you don't know me, I'm one of the elders here. I'm part of the teaching team, and it's my privilege to fill in for Pastor Robert this morning. He's away with his family, and so again, we're glad that you're here. We've been on a journey through Genesis, and for me, I like to get the big picture, and so let me back up a little bit, and let's get the big picture in the book of Genesis. In Genesis, it's real easy that you can divide it up into 4 main events and 4 people. All right? So I'm going to have you talk back to me this morning. You'll be my class for just a couple minutes, all right? So the 4 events are creation, fall, the flood, and nations. I was at a seminar one time and they put motions with it, and when you get to nations, it's like this. That could get dangerous, though, so we won't do that. But creation, fall, flood, and nations. Say it with me. Creation, fall, flood, and nations. And then you have 4 people. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. If you've been around the church, those names sound familiar to you. So say those with me. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. That's the whole book of Genesis. The first 11 chapters are creation, we saw that. The fall, we saw that. Today, we're going to start talking about Noah and the coming flood. And then God is going to do something with the nations. And then after that, Abraham becomes the key founder of this nation that God is going to work through. And then his son Isaac, and then Jacob, and then one of my favorite characters in the Bible, Joseph. And so that's the book of Genesis. And so, and also in Genesis, we see some really foundational things. Robert and I talk about messages beforehand and where he's going, and just it's fun to talk about those things. And he sent me some things, and in Genesis, we see who God is, who we are, and why the world is the way that it is. And I thought, that's really good. We see who God is. The very first verse, the very first statement in the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And I was just glancing through some things last night. The message was all done, but just trying to read around and think about the message this morning. And somebody said, if you get that first sentence in the Bible, it changes everything. That's right. In the beginning, God created everything. And we don't explain who God is. He's assumed. He's the Almighty One. He created not just the world, but the universe. And we have the technology these days to be able to see out into the universe and how vast it is. And God created all of that. Now, if you believe that, or if you don't, it changes everything. You believe that, is it hard for Jesus to turn the water into wine? Oh, that's easy compared to the universe. But if you reject that, then that also affects everything. And you question so many things about the world, and there are a lot of people who do that. The second thing, who we are. God created us in his image. It says a couple of times that we are created in the image of God. That is such a key thing as we look at each other and as we look at other human beings. I believe God made us to be like him in some ways and to reflect him. That was God's intention in creating us as human beings. Now, I don't think we fully understand what that looks like, but let's think about it for a few minutes. We are made in God's image in that we can think and reason and communicate, and God gives us the ability to make decisions. We are like God in that we're creative. God created. I don't know if you thought about this. I don't think of myself as a creative kind of person. I had to do a creative writing when I was in English. Let me just say it was really bad. I'm not a creative person, I don't think. But when I think of that, I think of the arts. People who write music. I heard somebody say a while ago, how are people coming up with new melodies and new songs all the time? It just boggles my mind. Don't ask me to write a song. It'll be really bad. And artists, painting and drawing and sculptures and all those kind of things in art. To me, that's just amazing. Someday I'd like to go to the Sistine Chapel and see what's painted there and all the other things that Michelangelo and other people did. And that's just one piece of all that in history. God has made us to be creative. My dad was a carpenter, and he told me on several occasions, one of the things he loved about being a carpenter is at the end of the day, any day, at the end of the day, he could stand back and see what he had built. That's creativity. God made us that way, to be creative. We are moral creatures. We, I think, have an innate sense of right and wrong, and God holds us accountable for that which is right and wrong. And then God made us for relationships. You know that? I think COVID taught us a lot about that, right? We are created for relationships. We are relational kinds of beings. I think one of the things that's really important is our relationships with one another in the church. Did you ever think about that? This is a unique way that we come together as the body of Christ. I think of that all the time. God has put us right here in this place in Sterling Heights, and this group of people that God has brought together right now. Fellowship Chapel was not what it looks like now 10 years ago. We are here now in this place together, and we have relationships here. I have a Bible Buddies group, and that's just one of the relationships that I have, and I love it. I got a young guy in college, and a police officer, and who am I missing? A property manager, and me. And we come together, not as often as we should, but we have relationships with each other. And some of our community groups and some of the things that we do, we get to know one another because God has brought us together. We need to have healthy kinds of relationships. But most important of all, God made us to have a relationship with Him. We are relational beings, and God wants us to relate to Him. And not all human beings do that, but that was God's intention, that we would walk with Him. Even way back to one of the earliest church fathers, he said, if we don't have that relationship with Him, we have this hole. We call it sometimes that God-shaped hole. Only God can fill it. because we were made for that, to have relationship with him. Now that has a bunch of important implications very quickly. That impacts how we look at each other. If we are all made in the image of God, we treat everyone with respect. I think we've lost that in our culture. We as human beings are made in the image of God, and we need to respect each other. It impacts how we treat, I heard somebody say it this way, how we treat the most vulnerable among us. The very young, the very old, those that are sick, those that are in need. How do we treat those people? I have 2 grandkids that are really, really drawn to people with special needs. And they already work with them in pursuing education and helping them deal with people with special needs. Are people with special needs valuable? Absolutely. Because they are made in the image of God. Also, we have purpose. Life is meaningful. All of life is meaningful. The philosophies of our day will tell you otherwise. You take classes at a state university, you'll hear all kinds of things about you're born with a clean slate and everybody's, essentially a good person. Life has meaning. One of the famous atheists, Richard Dawkins, a philosopher and atheist, he famously talked about if this world is made by chance, this is what he said, this is what you would expect. And this is his famous quote. Life is nothing but blind, pitiless existence. He came right out and said it. If the world is by chance and you're made by chance, your life is meaningless. I don't believe that. God has made us in his image so that we could honor him. And if for nothing else, you can get up every day and say, I have today to do what I can to bring glory to my Creator. Glory to God. That's how God has made us. But one other thing, looking back, we saw this last week or two. We are broken. Human beings are made in the image of God, and I think that is still true. But we are broken. Sin brought brokenness into the world. And we saw how quickly that went downhill with Cain and Abel. And we'll see more of that in just a few minutes. So that brings us to where we are today, Genesis chapter 6. If you need that, one of those Bibles there near you, page 7, right at the beginning, and Genesis chapter 6. And today is kind of an introductory thing for next week. We're going to be talking about Noah. We introduce ourselves, we get to know Noah today, and then next week is the rest of the story. If you've been around the church, you know what that's going to be about, the great flood that is coming. I have to tell you a story. When I was growing up, there was this guy in our church. He was a really cool guy. And one of the reasons he was really cool is he played the guitar. Now, you got to understand, the church that I grew up in, there was a piano on that side and an organ on that side, and that's all there was. You might hear somebody play the trumpet every once in a while, but there was a piano and the organ. Guitar, you don't get to play the guitar in church. That's for camp and around the campfire. But somehow, this guy got to play the guitar in church. And the more that I think about it, I think he made up this song. I have decided against singing it for you. But he had the guitar, and he kind of told the whole story about Noah. And he kind of just told it while he was strumming on the guitar. And he said, the Lord said to Noah, there's going to be some rain. And he talked about the rain for a while. And there's going to be a flood. And then he got to the chorus. And the chorus was, and it was really, really simple. That's why I think he wrote this. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And he landed high and dry. That was the chorus. And then he said, Noah, you got to build a boat. And he told all the dimensions about the boat. And he says, and Noah, you got to get all the animals and bring them on the boat. And then the chorus. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Strum, strum, strum. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And he landed high and dry. And I can't think about Genesis 6:8 without thinking of that guy singing that song. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. That's where we're going. But we have to go through a couple of verses to get there first. Are you with me? Okay, Genesis chapter 6, and let's start right there. Verse 1. Then the people began to multiply on the earth, and daughters were born to them. Let's stop right there. People began to multiply on the earth. One of the questions that always comes up about the flood is how many people were there at this time? So let's do a little comparison right now. Looked it up. There's 8.1 something billion people in the world. So you can picture, at least a little bit, our world and how populated it is. Estimates that during that time were 750 million to billions. So somewhat equivalent to where we are now. So, a couple of people that do math. One guy took 2000 population growth and said, okay, with the population rate in 2000, there would have been, based on what we know, chapter 5, we have genealogy there and other things. Based on what we know, that's where that 750 million comes from. But he said, if you change the population growth by 0.1%, now you get 4 billion. So just that little bit gives you, thanks Gary, gives you a big difference. Or if you do it another way, give me 1 second. See how that does. Or if you look back in chapter 5, the average person in chapter 5 lived 912 years. I apologize to the ladies ahead of time, all right? If you could have children, let's just stretch it out, every 5 years, and you could only have children for 500 years. Now you're living until you're 900, so you know this is only a little more than half. But do the math. Every 5 years for 500 years. That's a lot of kids. And the multiplication of that, if that's true, you can have kids every 5 years and only for about half of your adult life. That number is in the trillions. So no matter how you do the math, there were lots of people on the earth. Some people look at the genealogy in chapter 5 and it's like, oh, okay, that's not very many people. And you know, they come up with this very small number. But the earth was filled with people. All right, let's keep going. Verse 2. And we have a really fun passage here. Verse 2. The sons of God saw beautiful women and took any that they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not always put up with humans for such a long time, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. So there's three groups of people that we need to talk about. We have the sons of God, and we need to figure out who they are. Kind of an unusual way to say that. And then we have beautiful women. So since we're going there, look down at verse 4. In those days, for some time after that, giant Nephilites lived in the earth. And whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. So we have sons of God, these beautiful women, and giant Nephilites. Isn't this great? Aren't you glad you came today? So who are these sons of God? All right, so that's a term that's just kind of, that doesn't seem normal here. And we're going to talk about who those might be. But just so you know, the Bible does use that word sometimes to refer to human beings and sometimes to angels. And you can find that in Psalms and some other places where it refers to a group of men or groups of angels. And so those are some ways that has been used in Scripture. We'll talk about what it means in just a minute. And then the beautiful women is literally in Hebrew, daughters of men. So it seems like there's this purposeful, I'm not sure if play on words is the right thing, but there's this purposeful thing going on. We have the sons of God and we have the daughters of men. All right, what is that doing? Okay, we'll talk about that too. And then the Nephilites. The Hebrew word is Nephilim. And the ending, if you don't know Hebrew, I-am ending means plural. So the translators just took that word and put an ending on it so you could see that this is a plural group of people. So this is Nephilites. They're this group of people. But most translators don't even bother to translate that because they're not sure who this group of people are. So the word means to fall upon someone as in war, to force your will on them, to fall on them and attack them, that kind of thing. And so that's the root of the word. And if they do translate it, sometimes it's translated giants. And so the New Living Translation put them both in there. Giant Nephilites. There's this group of people that were giants, all right? And so that's where they went with what that word means. All right, let's talk about that. Who are these sons of God? These sons of God, one more thing, married, verse 2, they took any that they wanted as their wives. That's a common phrase for getting married, to take a wife. So these sons of God married these daughters of men, and then we talk about this group of people, the Nephilites. All right, let's talk about who they could be. Three possibilities. That these are fallen angels. There are some people that look at this passage and say that these sons of God are fallen angels. Remember, the word means fallen ones, to fall upon something. So these are fallen angels intermarrying with women, and the result is these giants, this supernatural or superhuman race. So this superhuman race has now been created because of this thing that is out of the norm, that these sons of God came down to earth and married these women. And some of them suggest that was the whole purpose of the flood, that this superhuman thing had come about, and God had to wipe the whole human race out to get rid of these half supernatural, half human beings. That's one interpretation. I personally don't go with that one. Sounds a little outlandish. I have lots. I'm not going to give you all the pros and cons. If you want that, if you're that kind of person, see me in the lobby afterward. I'll be happy to tell you about it and debate you about it if you want. All right, number 2 is the Jewish, the common Jewish interpretation was that these were tyrants, that these were powerful leaders or judges. So these sons of God were human beings, but they were these powerful human beings. And they were judges, they had influence, and they were the ones that came and they intermarried, and they became, their kids followed in their footsteps, end of verse 4, heroes and famous warriors. So they were these judges, and they had influence, and they just were taking over the earth. That's the common Jewish interpretation. I'm going to go with number 3, all right? And that is that the sons of God are the godly line of Seth. That these are human beings. If you remember last week, Robert ended pretty much, except for talking about the genealogies real quick. He pointed this out. Go back to the end of chapter 4. Very last verse in chapter 4. When Seth grew up, remember Adam and Eve, they had 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and then their third son was Seth. When Seth grew up, he had a son and named him Enosh. At that time, people first began to worship the Lord by name. And so Seth and his sons began to worship God. And it was clear that they were God worshipers. Now, one of the reasons I go with this interpretation is context. When you read the Bible, anytime you read the Bible, one of the most important things is context. What book is it in? What's going on at the time? When is this? Genesis is way at the beginning. If you're reading out of Matthew, that's a whole different culture then. Where is it? And context is also what's going on before and after. So if I look at chapter 6, verse 1, I say, well, what was going on before this? Well, the genealogy is kind of a big parenthesis. So if you're looking at the storyline, I'm going to Genesis 4, verse 26. We have Seth and his kids, and they're worshiping the Lord. Skip the genealogies. And chapter 6, verse 1. People began to multiply, and this is what happens. And so if I'm looking at the context and the flow of the story, I think the best interpretation is that these sons of God are not some superhuman thing going on, but that these were the God worshipers, and they are intermarrying with these beautiful women, these daughters of men. And notice back in verse 2. They took any that they wanted as their wives. Possibly, I think, this is the problem. They became indiscriminate in their choices. They didn't marry other women who were worshiping the Lord. They just saw these women and said, hey, that looks good. And they took whoever they wanted as their wives. In other words, the godly ones weren't acting very godly. All right? It's the Don Pedde translation there. That's what's going on. These sons of God, these men, these followers of Seth were intermarrying. And the third reason that I go here is the whole flood, the reason for the flood, over and over again, and that's getting in the next week, was because of the sinfulness of man. God said, I'm going to wipe out man because of what he did. He wasn't wiping out this superhuman thing that was going on. It was because of the sinfulness that was going on. And we're going to see that very shortly. We read verse 3. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not always put up with human beings, for they are only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. So notice what happened. Average lifespan in chapter 5 was 912. And God says, look at what's going on the earth. Their lifespan is now going to be cut back to 120. Now that's a big jump. It went from 900 years to 120. But think of this. We're going to get to verse 5 momentarily and talk about the sinfulness of man. But if you had 900 years, this is kind of hard to wrap our minds around. How could you do with the skill, whatever your skill is? You know, my dad was a carpenter. How good could you get after 900 years? You'd be pretty good. You know, average work life these days, let's just use round numbers, from 20 to 70, you got 50 years. What if you had 900 years to perfect your skill? You'd get pretty good. But also think of this. If you had 900 years to really do evil, how good could you get at that? I remember my dad saying this as a kid, and I know I repeat it these days as a dad. My dad would hear about stuff that went on in the world, and it's like, if those people would put that much energy into doing something good, wouldn't this be a better place? And that was way before the internet. You think about all the it's hard not to think about security on the internet these days, right? All the hackers and all the stuff that's going on. I'm real careful about what I click on. And I click on something that looks really good. A new Tesla. Ooh, that looks interesting. Click, and what did I do? Somebody took over my computer again, you know? And I thought, if those hackers would use that energy for, how good could you get if you were bent on evil for 900 years? I think that was part of the problem. And God looked down at man and said, one thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut back their lifespan by a lot. And they went from 900 years average down to about 120. Now that's, again, going to be an average. You're going to see people in chapter 11 that live 300-400 years. So there are going to be some that are older. But God has cut that way back because of what was going on here. All right, let's keep going. Verse 4. Oh, we already talked about verse 4. Verse 5. And the Lord observed the extent of human wickedness on the earth, and he saw that everything that they thought or imagined was constantly and totally evil. What a verse. Look at all the superlatives in that verse. They were everything they thought, everything they imagined. It was consistently and totally evil. They were consumed with evil. You can see how bad things had gotten already. Let's talk about sin for a minute. We have to talk about it. What is sin? Sin is failure to conform to the moral law of God, to the character of God. It's in our attitudes. It's in our actions. If you've been around for a while, you might have heard of Barna. George Barna is the Gallup poll guy of Christian circles. And I ran into this just a few weeks ago. Americans, not Christians, Americans, 84% say sin exists, but only about half of people really sin. 52% of adults, it's about right, about half, say that they're sinners. Now, people who call themselves Christians, 30% of people who call themselves Christians deny that they're sinners. 1/3, again, about the same. They ask these questions different ways to get responses. 1/3 of adults say everybody else sins, but not them. And then here's one that really bothers me too. People who call themselves Christians, 70% of people that call themselves Christians say that people are basically good. So we need to take sin seriously. We need to come to grips with sin. It's not, that verse 5, it's not, look how bad it was back there in Genesis. Or, this is really easy to do, we're here in church, let's talk about how bad they are out there. We need to come to grips with our own sinfulness. Let's talk about that just for a few minutes. Romans 5:12 says that when Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death, so death spread to everyone, so that everyone sinned. We are all born sinners. If you're a parent, I don't have to tell you this. When our grandkids were little, we have grandkids in college now, that's so hard to imagine. But when our grandkids were little, they would come over the house, bring their kids over, and so our kids were over with grandkids, and they're 6 months old, all kinds of cuteness going on. And this is my sense of humor, I would wait for just the right moment when there was some awesome cuteness going on. And I would say to my kids, aren't they cute little sinners? Isn't that true? Do you have to teach your kids how to lie? Nope. Do you have to teach your kids to deceive and be mean and all those kind? You don't have to teach your kids that. They're cute. They are. And they're born. The Hebrew picture is this bent, a crooked stick. There's this bent toward sin. And we all have it. We all are born with this bent toward sin. A couple of quick verses. Jeremiah 17:9, the human heart is most deceitful of all things and desperately wicked. Who really knows how bad it is? Can I be honest with you? I don't like that verse. I grew up in the church. I will easily admit I'm a sinner. I will easily admit that I do things wrong. But to call myself desperately wicked is hard. That's really hard. But that's what he says. He says, who can know it? I heard somebody say a while ago, we're really good at deceiving ourselves when we want something. Isn't that true? We can talk ourselves into something that's wrong, and we can make excuses for it. Our hearts are desperately wicked. Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, and many times this happened, but Pharisees were condemning the disciples for eating with unwashed hands. And, that's not like you and I washing our hands before dinner, that kind of thing. It's this ritual thing that they were supposed to do before they ate. And Jesus said, that doesn't make you unclean. It's what comes from your heart. And the disciples kind of looked at Jesus and said, what? And Jesus said, this is Matthew 15, from the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, all sexual immorality, theft, lying, slander. These are what defile you. It all comes from the heart. And James tells us sin will take you further than you want to go. Sin will take you further than you want to go. He said, temptation comes from your own desires, which entice us and drag us away. And these desires give birth to sinful actions. And when sin is allowed to grow, it gives birth to death. Sin takes us further than we want to go. I lived in Florida for a number of years. Yes, that's true. I lived there and I moved back to Michigan. I love the fall. And we could swim in the Gulf of Mexico. It's 5 miles away. Go out to the Gulf of Mexico, and if you went to the public beach, they always had a flag out. There was a green flag, everything's good. There was a yellow flag, be careful. But when the red flag was out, that meant there was a dangerous undertow. And I began to look it up because we would hear of people who were dragged away. Many drowned. It was terrible. And you could be standing in knee-deep water. And this, we're not used to this in Michigan. I hear the Great Lakes, sometimes you can get an undertow. But you could be standing in knee-deep water and get sucked out into the Gulf. And many people lost their lives. And I thought, that's the way sin is. You say, you know what? I can stick my toe in the water. I can do this just a little bit. And it takes you much further than you want to go. Well, we need to wrap things up. So we need to get to the best part of the story. Verse 6. The Lord was sorry that he ever made them and put them on the earth. It broke his heart. God is emotional. God was grieved because of the sinfulness of man. By the way, it says he was sorry that he created man. Does God change his mind? We don't have time to talk about that. I know Robert has talked about that before. Does God change his mind? I heard it put this way. I thought this was really good. God doesn't change his mind, but God does change and can change and does change his actions. God does what he does, and that is when man sinned, he punished them for their sin. God punishes sin. God does what he does. God didn't change his mind, but because of man's sinfulness, God said, I'm going to punish them. But God said he's going to judge the world, and he's also going to save the world. Verse 7, he says, I will wipe out this human race that I have created. But verse 8, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found favor. The word sometimes is translated grace there. We've talked about this before too. What is grace? Grace is unmerited, undeserved favor. It's something you don't deserve. It's God giving you what you don't deserve. We all fall short. We're all sinners. Can I say it? We are all desperately wicked. We all have the potential to do very sinful things, and we do sinful things. And we don't deserve it. If you'd say, I deserve it, it's not grace anymore. Grace is undeserved. It's God giving us what we don't deserve. For the slide guy in the back there, I'm skipping to the end. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9. God saved you by his grace when you believed. You can't take credit for it. It's a gift of God. Salvation is not the reward for good things you have done, so no one of us can boast. God saved you by his grace. You didn't deserve it. Salvation comes from grace. And those are two of the key concepts in the Bible, that we are sinners and in great need. And God offers salvation by trusting him. But it's nothing that you deserve. It's not because, hey, God, I'm a good guy. Well, you might be a good guy, but that's not the point. You don't deserve it. But God offers what you don't deserve in salvation. You can experience the grace of God. So the challenge today, if you've never come to that point, number one, of saying, I am a sinner. I am corrupt from the inside out. You have to come to that point. You have to come to the place where you admit that. And then, if you've never experienced the grace of God in your life, you can. It's by trusting in what he has done to pay the penalty for all that sin. That's the grace of God.